Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and this is my review of Iris, a South Korean television series from 2009 that is 20 episodes long, with each episode lasting about 60 minutes each. It stars fan favorite Byung-hun Lee as an agent who's working for a national security system known as NSS in South Korea, who works to take down a secret organization that seeks to profit from war-mongering. Now, one of the best things about this show is how it sets up its conflicts, alright? So the plot synopsis is cliche, right? But the conflict it develops is pretty intriguing, and it represents a nice little twist on the South Korean-North Korean relationship. And it does this by taking the relationships between the characters and having them change significantly in exciting ways. Now, I love it. This is one of the plot turns that I really love, and this isn't really a spoiler because it happens early in the show. But I love it when some of the good guys do bad things, and some of the bad guys team up with some of the good guys, especially when, like, the crap hits the fan and the situation becomes, I guess, more fluid and volatile. And you'll see that happen in this show, where there's certain situations where a bad guy will have to team up with a good guy based on their common interests or common enemies. I always really enjoy that in movies and TV shows. Because, like, the idea of people who hate one another or who have a deadly conflict between one another having to come together and team up to defeat a common enemy is something that I've always found to be inherently powerful from a dramatic standpoint. Because when you think about it, it's like the exact opposite of a romantic relationship breaking up, right? Because in that situation, you have a strong, like, bond that transitions into hate in a lot of cases, right? A strong hate. But in the situation I described here, you have a potentially deadly conflict relationship that transitions into a protective one, and they have, like, a mutual respect for one another at times. So I've always been attracted to that kind of story element, and I think Iris pulls it off, and it represents kind of like the core of the entire show, in my opinion. Another observation I made, and this is coming from someone who's only seen Korean films, South Korean films, and TV shows, but this is just an observation I've made over the years. South Korea's depiction of their most relevant real-life threat, which is North Korea, is very different from other countries in cinematic history. Like, if you look at America's depiction of the Russians in the films from the 80s, or China's depiction of the Japanese in their current films, or even South Korea's depiction of the Japanese in their current films, in many of those cases, the other country is almost demonized or shown as caricatures or mustache-twirling villains. But in many cases, South Korean films that concern North Korean conflicts, there's more instances where the North Korean characters are protagonists in those films. Like Joint Security Area is an example. Shiri from back in the day is another. More recently, Confidential Assignment was one that had the same type of thing. Now, of course, the relationship between North and South Korea is very different from the countries I mentioned, but I find it interesting how, the South Korean filmmakers are willing to balance out these films and TV shows a lot more when it concerns a North Korean conflict. At least a good chunk of them that I've seen. I've just found it to be pretty interesting, because I like to compare different industries. So that's something I've noticed, and it happens in this show as well. Now, the casting is solid. Byung-hun Lee is very good as usual. If you're a fan of him, you'll like him in this. But I also really liked So-yeon Kim in this show. This was the role that made me kind of a fan of hers. I seeked out some of her other stuff after watching this. She plays a North Korean assassin who has similar dilemmas as Lee's character. She's really good at playing kind of a partially vulnerable badass. She's a North Korean assassin, but she's also vulnerable, and it gives her some multidimensionality. And she's capable of defending herself, of course. And then you could tell that there's a lot of emotion that she's feeling beneath the surface that she never expresses really through dialogue. There's like one or two scenes of dialogue when she kind of gives a little backstory about herself, then you understand her more. But, in many instances, her character simply does what needs to be done, but you can tell there's more beneath the surface that's going on. And, it's very, very easy to connect with a character like this. I actually really liked her in this show. Arguably my favorite character in the show, actually. Another character I liked was played by Sung-woo Kim, who, again, plays one of the North Koreans. And not an actor that has had a lot of exposure with Western audiences. A lot of his roles have kind of gone under the radar. I've enjoyed some of his other projects, though, like Secret Tears, the film, and Hotelier, the K-drama. So just like So-yeon Kim, he's very convincing and also endearing in his role. And then there's two side actors. If you're a fan of Jumong, there's two side actors from that K-drama that make their way into this one. And I forgot they were in this because the last time I saw Iris was like 10 years ago. So I saw it again. I'm like, oh, I recognize those guys. So it was kind of cool seeing them. And then music star T.O.P. is in this. When he showed up, it was big back in the day because he was a really popular guy. He's like high level, upper tier level music star in South Korea. And he plays an assassin in this. And I think he does a pretty good job. in it. So Iris is a very addictive show. Even on my second viewing recently, it's very engaging. The pacing is really good. There's not a lot of dead filler in this at all. You got 20 hours is the length, and it moves at a good clip. There's not a lot that I would cut out of this. It's similar in some ways to the American TV show 24 with Kiefer Sutherland, which I'm beginning to itch to rewatch, actually. It's seasons 1 to 5 of 24 are really good, and it kind of tanks after season 6 or the first 10 minutes of season 6. But you'll find similarities to Iris in 24. There's like a constant threat that's introduced throughout the show, and it's trying to be neutralized by a group of people in like a high-tech anti-terrorist organization for the protagonists. So, and someone's life is in danger basically every episode. So it's pretty addictive, exciting stuff. Now, this show does not waste time, as I said. But there is like a setup time. Like the opening 4 or so episodes are kind of like the setup episodes. But even they're entertaining. So this show grabs you pretty early, I think. There's a good amount of action to enjoy in this. In my opinion, though, like the worst part of the action is the hand-to-hand fighting, which is pretty tightly edited. They use the Hollywood editing strategy, which I don't like. So you're not going to get like the raid level action in this, and in terms of the hand-to-hand fighting. So that's the weakest element, but there's a lot of other nice stuff to watch in this, like the shootouts, the car chases, the foot chases, and the suspense and thriller aspects are actually very effective in this. I really like some of the car chase shootout combinations. The two big set pieces are an infiltration into like kind of like a high-tech, I guess you would say, I don't want to spoil it for it. It's like a high-tech base of sorts, and it takes an entire episode, which is really good. And then, of course, there's like the big climactic finale, which they filmed in an urban street area in what appears to be Seoul. And that must have been pretty expensive. So they did a good job with the action in this, I think. And plus, the action in this movie is compounded by the fact that you actually care for the good guys, and you definitely want to see the bad guys get taken down. Because the bad guys in this show, they pull a lot of strings, and they're tough to take down. So I like that. Production values are good. I think some of the production was actually shot on location in Hungary and Japan. So that's cool. The score is really good in this too. Some of the theme tunes are really effective. I like them. Gives some adrenaline to the action. Now, one thing to keep in mind, if you're not familiar with Korean dramas, is that Iris does retain certain aspects of a typical K-drama or melodrama. Okay, so every episode is going to have some scenes where you have some K-drama moments. some things that are maybe slightly cheesy. Maybe have a weepy Korean song that plays about love, or a little bit of melodrama here and there. But those elements in this show are less than the typical K-drama. So I think this is more, a Westerner could enjoy this show more than a typical K-drama, I think. Also, one thing I actually found distracting at times is that certain moments, a character will find out where another enemy is hiding instantly, like geographically. And there's really no explanation given as to how they did it. Like, for example, there's one point where a character escapes South Korea and goes into, like, the wilderness of Japan. And then, like, 5 minutes later, their enemy will end up finding them. And you're like, how did that happen? So there's a few of those moments as well. But they're kind of a minor flaw, in my opinion, because the show's so entertaining. And finally, some viewers dislike the final scene of the show. I understand that. I kind of agree with it. I think the scriptwriters could have done something different with the final scene. But with all that in mind, I strongly recommend Iris. This is just as entertaining in my recent viewing as it was 10 years ago. I really enjoy this. It's a good example of an action-based Korean drama that works. It works. And it's currently available on Netflix in the United States, so check it out. And as always, we'll see you next time.